Very good afternoon and welcome to this episode of Fridays with Fintelekt, where we bring to you the latest insights and knowledge in the area of AML and CFT. My name is Arpita Bedekar and I will be your host for today, where we are joined by Dev Odedra, an independent AML and financial crime expert and director of Minerva-Strategem Consulting based in the UK. Dev has over a decade of experience in managing financial crime risk in the retail, corporate, and investment banking sectors. His expertise covers investigations, advisory, and controls implementation and improvement. Welcome to this episode, Dave, and I hope everything's okay with you and yours during the pandemic.
Yes, thank you for having me. And yes, we've been in lockdown and just following the updates and hopefully this situation improves very soon.
Right, yeah, same here. So, we've chosen today an unconventional topic to discuss, one on media portrayals of AML. At the outset, let me define media. We'd like to include everything print and online news, books, magazines, films, TV, and the social media. And the first thing that comes to mind is how little is really available or written about AML on these channels, especially considering the wide ranging impact that money laundering has upon the common public. To kick off this conversation, your views on the issue, Dave?
Yeah, I think in the media, there's, in my view, there's not enough at the moment. And one of the challenges, I think, in that is that it's, like you mentioned, it's not understood enough. But equally, the focus when we do hear about it is on the activity or the actions of the individuals involved. So you'll hear about the drug traffickers, the seizures of drugs, or you'll hear about the terrorist attacks and what they did. Because I think people relate to or identify with that action immediately without any need for an explanation. They know drugs, bad, somebody caught, terrorist attack, loss of life. Whereas with the money laundering, it tends to play a secondary sort of role in the news in media, as opposed to a primary role in when the message is coming through in the news or in print. And I think that's partly because not everybody understands it. Whereas the crime itself, the drug trafficking, terrorism, or any other predicate offence, it's easily identifiable amongst the public and the audience. It's almost like there's no need to explain anything to them. Somebody did something bad, and this is what it was. Whereas with money laundering, sometimes it can be a bit difficult to explain that to somebody who's not familiar with it, and it's something the audience or the public kind of see as out of sight as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't really see the impact on them of this activity immediately compared to the crimes that are reported in the media. Something I'd like to share very quickly. I spoke to one of the creators of a TV show called Muck Mafia. His name was Hossein Amini.
Okay.
And we spoke a little bit about the show and the creation and what he knew about money laundering, financial crime. And what he said was he was fascinated by it. And but one of the challenges that they found, and this is when I mentioned the Bangladesh bank heist to him, and we were talking about why there's not enough in the media. And what he said is, it's almost how do you make something like money laundering digestible for the audience? How do you get that across in, say, a TV series or a movie, at the same time as keeping the audience engaged? Drugs, guns, and big yachts and airplanes, that attracts the audience's attention. Whereas trying to get across, how somebody's just the word launder, how to get that across in media, that's a challenge. But from the media perspective, he said, found that interesting. We had interesting conversations on this, and he found that interesting, how the world has changed now. In the old days, you'd see suitcases of cash. Now everything's digital, and it's about capturing the challenge in capturing that and making it appeal or digestible to the audience, where they can quickly understand the concepts of it. So I think that's one of the challenges of getting this across to the public, as opposed to the crimes that are connected to it as well. So yes, it's difficult, but we're seeing more slowly. We're seeing more of the money laundering side in the media, with some of the newer films and TV shows that we've seen in more recent years. It's a slow uptake on this side, but I think slowly we may see more in the coming years.
Right, right. That's well said. I think some of the high-profile cases like the Panama Papers expose did garner a lot of public attention. Similarly, in India,
Yeah,
we've seen some change in people's awareness levels following some very high-profile, cases wherein the perpetrators defaulted or defrauded on millions of dollars of loans and simply fled the
yeah,
country. But so I think
yeah.
there is a little bit of awareness and it's increasing. But the question is it going to take such large cases to increase public awareness? Or can the financial services community be more proactive, about reaching out to the public and making them more aware about money laundering and issues like that?
I think they can, but their challenge from their perspective, I think, is they might be attracting too much attention, unnecessary. There's a lot of reputational damage that can come about as well. I'm all for open, honest, transparent discussions and declarations, but I just think from a business perspective, I imagine they'd be reluctant to try and attract attention to themselves if they can help it. But like you mentioned, some of the cases, the Nirav Modi, that was in the media just today. We've seen the Vijay Mallya case over here playing out in courts as well.
That's right.
I think, yeah, the more that it does come in the media, I think it will attract even more attention to it, and more people will start asking questions. I know you mentioned a little bit about the Panama Papers. A lot of people have recently seen the movie The Laundromat, and they've been asking me,
Right.
"Oh, you work in money laundering, don't you? Oh, okay, I didn't know that." And a lot of people didn't know these things. Oh, I didn't know that's what you. Oh, okay, now it makes sense. So the more it does come out in the media, I think it does drive or helps drive change as well. Even with the Panama Papers, the leaks initially, when that happened to where we are today with the news articles and the constant media attention on that, it's helped drive the change towards the more transparency that we see today. So slow, but yeah, these large scandals are attracting that attention to it, I think.
Correct. Correct. So what one actually notices is that where official information is available, it is mainly around the obligations of financial institutions or businesses. But how important would it be to improve the media portrayal of AML, especially for the purposes of widening the reporting net and extending it to accountants or real estate or lawyers or the whole DNFBP community?
I think that's a very good question. I think that is very important because just beyond banks, a lot of these other facilitators, as they're called, they play equally big role in facilitating financial crime, not on purpose all the time, but they do have a equal responsibility in making sure that the financial system is protected. We've seen recently, July 2018, there's a FATF guidance paper on professional money launderers, as they call it, but I like to call it professionals that launder. I think it's technically there's no such thing in my view as a professional money launderer. It's not a recognized profession, but there are professionals that are involved in that activity. So yeah, there's a bit more focus on it from that perspective. We're seeing more regulatory focus as well. In the UK, we've got something called OPBAS, which is the regulator's regulator, if you will, because we've got loads of non-bank type of businesses, things like accountants, that have different regulators, and they might be doing things slightly differently. So this is more like a oversight of all of them. So there's been a lot of focus on that over the last few years. That was only created a few years ago, and there's more focus on that. They issue an annual report on how they're getting on, and they've said there's been more awareness amongst this community as well. And I think the professionals that launder, I think that topic alone, again, related to the media, there's been more attention on that over the years as well. TV shows like Ozark, that's attracted a fair amount of attention, where the financial advisor ended up laundering for a drug cartel to try and make back some of the money that they'd been skimming. So again, that started to attract more attention. I had friends and family again. Oh, have you been watching Ozark? Oh, they're involved in money laundering. That's the kind of area that you cover, isn't it? So and this is amongst friends and family who have no anti-financial crime background. So it's the general public. These shows are attracting attention to even outside of banks, that other field as well. Again, we mentioned the Panama Papers, the movie, The Laundromat. That's attracted a lot of attention as well, and it's kind of helped to get us into this position where, particularly in the EU, there's a lot of focus, and in the UK on UBO registers and transparency. That transparency is a global area, but again, I think there can be more focus on this if they make it appealing, like some of these TV shows, and digestible, like we mentioned earlier. It can help drive more awareness and attention amongst the general public and audiences, particularly on these other facilitators as well. So yeah, I think I'm a bit biased in my view, because I like anti-money laundering, the field, and I like to see more TV shows and movies on this. So I'd say a bit more on this would be more than welcome, not only for myself as a consumer of that type of media, but also for raising awareness on these other facilitators, gatekeepers, if you will, in creating awareness amongst the general public towards them as well, and their role they might play in the financial system.
Right. That's very interesting indeed. We're discussing that it's hard to explain the role even to friends or relatives. It's actually such a complex ecosystem, but people are blissfully unaware of its existence. But do you think better championing of the role of the AML compliance officer might help attracting more talent to this field?
Yes, I did. I've been thinking this myself, and in my view, I think the talent is there, but I think there needs to be more empowerment of the individuals in these positions. So the pool, I've met seasoned professionals. I've met people coming into the field, very talented, whether they've got a lot of experience or they're new to the field. The newer generation, very keen to understand, learn, develop. The seasoned professionals have been there, done that, seen a lot of things. They have the confidence in their experience. But I think it's a case of empowerment a little bit more. Their role is essentially seen as a blocker, if you will. The people or the team that normally says no. One thing I've been thinking about is whether a seat at the table, if you will, at the executive table, might make a bit more of a difference. We have chief data officers and whatnot, and chief financial officers. Why not a chief anti-money laundering officer, somebody who can sit at the head table and be the voice of an anti-financial crime function a bit more, and have a bit more empowerment to be able to sit there amongst executive members of an organization, and really champion the authority, not authority, the responsibility, if you will, or of a bank, to manage its financial crime risks. So I think an equal footing like that may help, because generally you speak of compliance, AML, it's just seen as the team that that a hurdle needs to be jumped over amongst the front line, whereas that's not really always the case. We're there to protect the banks or the institutions we're covering. We have to do that in a safe way, and we have to be able to do that without being pressured into changing decisions or making decisions that might focus on profit over compliance. I've had loads of discussions. I've developed a bit of a thick skin from working with sales, frontline traders, where their focus is on the profit, whereas mine's obviously on the risk. In any of the decisions I make, I don't look at the profit. I know it's a business, but I don't look at that. It doesn't weigh in on my decisions at all. I purely focus on the risk, and I try and stress this to people I speak to, is that my job is not to make money. My job is to manage the risk, and I think a bit more empowerment may help compliance officers and AML staff. But equally, I think a bit more, if we speak to a bit more open communication, if you will. A lot of the traders and frontline staff that I speak to, I try and get an understanding of their business, try and understand, where are they coming from. I listen, I try and take their views on board. But then I try and impart what I know and use my experience to show how the risk weighs in or plays into the situation, and equally try and give real life examples, situations that I've been in. I try and say, look, this is a situation I've been in. It might be similar to your situation here, and then I find it helps to ask questions as well. Ask an open question saying, there is a potential money laundering risk here. How do you feel about being responsible for that decision to allow that to happen? Would you be comfortable in allowing a potential criminal to operate at this institution? I try and ask open questions like that, just to get their views and see how they are comfortable with that. And most of the time, I found they don't. It's not a case of they want to do bad and they just want the criminals to come on board. I think sometimes there's a lack of appreciation because their focus at the end of the day is the sales side. It's they're trying to make money, generate. The whole purpose of a institution is to make money. So after those sorts of open discussions and visibility from myself, it does help. I always say, anytime you need to speak, I'm available. I try, hide in a back office somewhere in a compliance team. I try and be visible, and I try and listen to the views. And it's served me well. And I try and give that advice to peers as well. Is to be there, ask questions, impart experience and your expertise. That partnership is needed, especially within an organization. We are ultimately in the same team. If you can make money safely and confidently, keeping the bad guys away, it's a win-win for all of us.
Right.
So I think, yeah.
Right. Thanks. That brings me, to the role of regulators or law enforcement agencies. I remember at one of our summits last year, the FIU head of a particular Asian country, they had recently undergone their FATF mutual evaluation. And she was narrating how during that evaluation process, the FIU ran several public awareness campaigns about AML CFT. They went up to schools and, and used the radio as a medium. And the objective was really to make it easier for banks to do KYC and due diligence, because people actually understand why it is being done. At the same time, make people more aware, and bring in more whistleblowing kind of complaints on money launderers or criminals. Would you say this may be a good strategy for other countries to follow? And, stakeholders such as regulators or law enforcement also try to create more awareness among the masses on AML CFT?
Certainly. Yes, certainly. not enough, I think. Recently, we've seen in the UK with the NCA and law enforcement and the FBI, I think it's only late last year as well, where they focused on money mules. So that's created a lot of awareness to stop fraud. Fraud is a big problem. I think we don't see that and how it ties into money laundering sometimes. But yeah, it's created a lot more awareness around that, and it helps. I think more is needed. So I think certainly yes. To answer your question, much more would help in creating awareness around money laundering and these other financial crimes. Just focusing on money mules very quickly. We've seen a large focus on that particular area amongst law enforcement and even banks focusing on fraud. But this is, I've seen this firsthand since the 1990s. Slightly different channels maybe now with digital banking and whatnot, but it's not a new typology. It's been around for a very long time. But with the attention that's been given to it, it does come across as a new typology or something new. So I think yes, much more campaigns in creating awareness around around these types of things from law enforcement and FIUs. But equally, I think there's other stakeholders that could help in this as well. You've got banks, financial institutions themselves. There's been a lot of focus on ESG lately, environmental, social, and corporate governance reports. They tend to focus on these sorts of things like how much are we investing in coal and how much rainforests are being chopped down through activities that we might finance. There's a lot of focus on green energy at the moment, things like that. But I think a lot more in that report could focus on financial crimes. What are the banks doing to help mitigate financial crime? I think that reports like that might help. I know it's a long, lengthy report. Not everybody may read it, but if you can show that you've done a little bit more, it might help create that awareness amongst financial institutions. Other stakeholders equally are investors. I think they play a very big part in the social awareness space. Because we've had with the Westpac recently, I think it was November, just late last year, they were refunded some of the money that Westpac generated from a capital raising exercise following the scandal news that broke there. So that's had an impact on the financial institution. It might help drive change. If you can convince investors to make more sound decisions, a lot of organizations may focus a bit more on their efforts to tackle money laundering. But I think investors again play a big part. With Danske Bank, I was looking at the share price last year, and from 2018 March, when the scandal broke, to the 18 months after, there was a 66% drop in the share price as the news and the media covered the issue. Difficult to say whether the whole share price drop was related to the scandal, but in my view, it's very likely that it played a large part in the significant drop. Equally, the Swedbank scandal, within a couple of days, the 26th of March till I think it was about the 29th of March, the share price dropped 25%, particularly following, I guess, the dismissal of the CEO in relation to the money laundering scandal. So yes, I think institutions can do a little bit more, and equally investors. But institutions more so as well, because I'm sure we've all heard the term "money makes the world go round," and institutions. Again, this is not just banks. This is accountants, people in the legal profession. They all play a role in the turning of the money around the world. And if you're responsible for that, and if you're facilitating that, you do have a big social responsibility to the citizens of the world, I think, in making sure that you keep criminals out of that system. So I think, yeah, they can do a bit, a lot more, and equally they should be doing a lot more to show, we've got this big responsibility to make the money go round the world, but equally we're doing something to be socially responsible for that, for the citizens of the world, in making sure there's no impact on them, because a lot of people don't seem to understand that money laundering, it touches everything really, and this is the thing, the public might not be that aware. They'll see the end crimes, but they might not see this having an impact on that. But I think awareness, the more awareness, more media, can only be a good thing, and I think that can really help in driving a shift, both from the consumer and from those facilitators doing it legally or illegally in that space.
Thanks, Dev. This has been a very interesting discussion,
Great.
and I'm sure a lot of food for thought for our viewers today. Many thanks for spending the time with us and for sharing your views on the topic. And friends, thanks for listening, and we look forward to have you join us on the next Friday. This is Arpita signing off.